Afshin, welcome to the program. Great to have you on today. Look, first of all, take us inside the room. What happened at this summit? What was the mood there? And ultimately, what do you think all of this says about the state of the U.S. Saudi relationship right now?
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be with you. You know, the mood was very upbeat. It was very upbeat, partly because, I've attended many of these bilateral business summits here in Washington, but it's very rare, Dan, to have both the head of government visiting and the president of the United States coming to attend the summit. So that added a certain amount of energy and buzz. And also the previous day's events in which the pomp and circumstance in which the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was received at the White House. So there was a great deal of energy, a great deal of buzz, a great deal of focus on future forward industries like AI, energy for AI. And then, of course, when President Trump, comes in and delivers his speech, it was standing room only. As you can imagine, when President Trump delivers speeches, it often becomes somewhat of a long, almost colorful campaign speech in which he talked about the U.S. Saudi relationship, but he also spent time, condemning Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve governor, going after his predecessor and others. So that certainly added to the kind of the theatrics of this event.
And Afshin, when you look at the CEOs who actually showed up here, Chevron, Nvidia, Google, Salesforce, Boeing, Andreessen Horowitz, just to name a few, what does the turnout tell us about corporate America's appetite for Saudi capital right now and the opportunities that this reset in the relationship is ultimately opening up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it tells you a great deal about this the appetite for Saudi capital because we heard these big numbers, the 600 billion, and then that was expanded to the 1 trillion. Now, whether or not we get anywhere close to those numbers, clearly there are substantive partnerships taking place. I mean, you talked earlier about the humane partnerships with several of the leading AI companies. The CEO of Saudi Aramco, Amin Nasser, was very bullish in his comments on LNG. And Saudi Aramco has been investing in the United States, and they're looking to invest further in the United States. So, there's a great deal of interest in Saudi capital. But I think these headline figures like $1 trillion, even if we don't get to that, we're seeing real substantive relationships here in which both sides have skin in the game.
Take me inside this number, because the headline out of Washington is this idea that Saudi Arabia could lift its U.S. investments to $1 trillion, potentially even $1.5 trillion if you take Trump's joke seriously. So how much of this do you think is actually real? What's material here?
Yeah, I think, it's going to be, if we think of, let's take a look at another pledge from a neighboring Gulf Arab country, the United Arab Emirates. They pledged about $1.4 trillion over a 10-year period. And if you think about this over 10-year periods and 15-year periods, then it becomes a more reasonable pledge. I mean, if you think about this in terms of in the next 2 to 3 years of President Trump's term, then I think it's going to be very difficult to meet a pledge like $1 trillion or even $600 billion. But there was some significant announcements that were made about the potential sale of F-35s, the sale of tanks. I think we're going to, put we would end up putting all of those under the numbers. Look, the energy that is going to be required for U.S. data centers, the actual investments in these data centers, it's going to require enormous amounts of capital. So you can quickly move into the tens and hundreds of billions. But again, I think that's an aspirational number that obscures the fact that there is actually real substantive investment going on both sides.
Also comes at a time, Afshin, when we see Saudi really straining to finance some of the mega projects it has at home. Do you think the kingdom can realistically deploy $1 trillion plus into the U.S. economy while also trying to fund all of this activity domestically?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up those the mega projects, because certainly we're seeing Saudi Arabia more constrained fiscally, and again, whether they're going to have the money to be able to make these investments, it remains to be seen. But again, if you think about the nature of these investments, these are growth investments. when you're investing in AI infrastructure, you're investing in energy infrastructure, and these are two of the fastest growing industries in the United States. So these, they're not doing a favor to President Donald Trump or the United States. These are real commercial investments. But I think what's important also to remember, as I was sitting there in this hall and thinking about the Saudi-U.S. relationship and thinking about those mega projects, I think actually, Dan, the real mega project in Saudi Arabia is this economic transformation vision that has been engineered by the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And how this ship of state takes a long time to veer, but it is veering. And we are seeing a dramatically different Saudi Arabia today than we saw 10, 15 years ago, and a dramatically different conversation between Saudi Arabia and the United States than we would have had 10 or 15 years ago, when the focus would have been on security and geopolitics and energy. Today, the focus is on investment in AI and data centers.
Well, let's take a step back and talk about the broader relationship, because I look at this through the lens of business. We speak the language of business here on CNBC, so much of this trip has been broadly optimistic from an optics perspective when you assess what has unfolded so far, but also looking at this through the political lens. This is MBS's first trip to the US since the Khashoggi murder, and I'm sure you've seen the New York Times called this Trump-MBS meeting yesterday a disgrace. Now, that's even as we see Saudi and US officials announcing billions in new investment and security ties as well, and the relationship has moved forward since that incident. How are the optics of this playing domestically, in your view?
Well, I think that the way President Trump answered that question about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, played very poorly, certainly in the media in the United States, and very poorly among the broader public as well. And I think that the real danger that Saudi Arabia faces in this relationship that is just moving up and to the right is that it is, I think what Saudi Arabia would like is a very robust and strategic relationship with the United States of America. What is emerging is a robust and strategic relationship with President Trump and the Republican Party. And the danger that Saudi Arabia could face is a few years from now, if there is a Democratic president, if there's a midterm election shift, Saudi Arabia doesn't want to be in a position where they are, seen as too close to one side or the other side. And I think that's a real danger that they face in the nature of the relationship right now.